Hi there, welcome to this session of Psychology, Chapter 9, which incidentally is the last chapter. And in this chapter, we're going to focus upon the discipline of being a psychologist, a practitioner. So let's get started. We're going to cover briefly what is the exam perspective. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding psychology as a subject in the context of being a practitioner. Okay? We know what psychology as a subject is, but if you want to become a practitioner of psychology, how do you look at this subject? That's number 2. Then we will get into the important skills, attitudes, experience, etc. that are needed for you to be a successful practitioner of psychology. ठीक है? चलो आगे चलते हैं. लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव से पहले you are doing all of this in my view at all times for 2 reasons. One, to actually imbibe and learn about a new discipline that's fairly exciting. Like I have shared elsewhere in chapters, a good, effective leader, doctor, manager, they're all very good practicing psychologists. They don't practice it as a profession, but they practice it in their personal and in their organizational lives. ठीक है? तो while we learn about it, it is important for you to also be mindful about how do you score the max in your examinations. 3 to 4 questions are compulsory, mandatory from this important chapter. Pay attention to the phrases and definitions. Okay? And wherever I find a phrase or definition coming across, I am going to pause for a moment and remind you. But make sure, this is a subject which is very fuzzy, very esoteric. It's not like maths, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Here, you convey all of it through language. तो आपको phrases याद करना ज़रूरी है, definitions याद करना ज़रूरी है, names याद करना ज़रूरी है. ठीक है? Let's move. साइकोलॉजी के प्रैक्टिस करने के 2 डिस्टिंक्ट सब डिसिप्लिन्स हैं. ओके, नंबर 1 is where as a psychology researcher you are dedicated to this discipline, and what you are doing is a scientific method driven research. That is what is profession number 1 in psychology. Which means, let's say the multiple intelligence theory propounded by Howard Gardner, उनको दिमाग में कुछ आइडिया चमका. उन्होंने कहा कि इस तरह से मैं इंटेलिजेंसेस को अलग अलग तरीके से देखता हूं और ये हो सकता है. उसका हाइपोथेसिस बनाया, रिसर्च किया, ग्राउंड पे गए, लोगों से बातचीत की, क्वेश्चनर्स बनाया, इंटरव्यूज किए, फाइंडिंग्स किया, एनालिसिस की. All of that is done by one kind of a psychologist, and that psychologist ends up propounding theories, giving out tools, instruments, outcomes, research papers. That's one kind of practice. Okay? The other kind of practice is service oriented. What do you mean by service oriented? I am a psychologist, let's say in a school or in a college, or I am practicing for special children. So I take the theories, practices, etc. that are done by these people, I take it into the real world and I help solve problems for real people in the real world. That could be a youngster, an individual, a group, a company, an organization, anybody. Is it clear? So there are 2 kinds of psychology practitioners that you will find, and we'll talk more about them as we move into this session. There are some imperatives जिसके बगैर psychological practice नहीं हो सकता. वो कौन कौन से हैं? Number 1, it assumes that if you want to become a psychological practitioner, you need to have interest in people. Or if you find somebody doing that, you know that that person has interest in people, in observing people, in taking note of different kinds of behavior. Number 2, this is possible only in addition to having interest, you also have the willingness to help. Not that you will go and catch people and start giving your fundas to them, but There is a willingness to help because you have knowledge and you want to be of help to that person in his or her life. One of the things that has been observed in the recent past, and that is a very important attribute of practicing psychology, is there is a growing acceptability of this as an important profession. एक ज़माना था, अभी भी कुछ कुछ सोशियो इकोनॉमिक सेगमेंट्स में, जोग्राफिकल लोकेशंस में होता है कि आप साइकोलॉजिस्ट के पास जा रहे हो तो ये माना जाता है कि ये पागल हो गया है, ये दिमाग इसका ठीक नहीं है, तो साइकोलॉजिस्ट के पास जा रहा है. ऐसा एक थोड़ा सा स्टिग्मा हैज़ बीन देयर इन द पास्ट. इट स्टिल इज देयर, though it is reducing over the past decade or two. If I actually tell you a couple of examples, psychology can also be used for peak performance. You know, a cricketer like a Virat Kohli or a tennis player like a Djokovic, they always have this mental coach. They coach you towards peak performance. That also is a part of psychology. Okay, so it's not just repair, it also is to prepare. There are both kinds of services that you can offer as a psychologist. If you look at many institutions, you know, if you want to get enrolled into the armed forces, many corporates, many top institutions, आपके examination या test या entrance exam के अलावा, they also use some of these tools to check इसके मोटिवेशन लेवल्स क्या हैं, इसके पर्सनैलिटी टाइप्स क्या है, इसका लोको ऑफ इन्वेंट्री क्या है, वेरियस इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स दैट आर यूज्ड, आर्म्ड फोर्सेस, इंस्टीट्यूशंस, कॉर्पोरेट्स. सो दिस हैज बिकम नॉट ओनली एक्सेप्टेबल बट इट हैज बिकम अ वेरी एसेंशियल पार्ट ऑफ रिक्रूटमेंट एंड सिलेक्शन in various parts of the world and organizations. Keep this in mind, read up more while we move forward. एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग एस्पेक्ट है साइकोलॉजी का. एक्चुअली ज़्यादातर हम सब सोचते हैं कि मुझे तो साइकोलॉजी थोड़ी बहुत मालूम है, और एंड हम लोग किसी और के बारे में टिप्पणी भी कर देते हैं एज इफ वी कैन रीड माइंड. परहैप्स that is true, and some of the things that we always use in our daily parlance are the words such as intelligence. It's a very specific technical word, but we use it in our normal life. Similarly, something like, you know, we talk about somebody, you know, that person has an inferiority complex, this person has insecurity, that person feels overconfident about himself. You know, do we suffer from identity crisis? How do I handle stress? What do you think is that person's attitude? What do you think is that person's aptitude? All of these are very important and very well read, very well documented and researched terms, subjects within psychology. But we use it almost in our daily life. And क्या होता है कई मर्तबा के we end up playing the pseudo psychologist because we think we understand something. Now, if you have to contrast this amateur psychologist with a professional psychologist, what are the differences that you will find? Number one is that an authentic real psychologist has 4 important things that you would cross-check, or that is cross-checked before he is certified as authentic. Number one, the appropriate educational qualifications, whether it is at the undergrad level or a postgrad level or a PhD, with professional training. Did you do internships? Did you work with a maestro or a very senior psychologist in an institution? Have you been trained and certified? What kinds of affiliations do you hold with respectable psychological institutions? Just like we look for a doctor, na? He's an MBBS, he's an MD, and now he's worked with AIMS. Those kinds of things you would say. Oh, he's a PhD in psychology, then he has done this research paper and training in NTL in US, National Training Laboratory, and he's a very noted psychologist, or she is a noted psychologist. Now she works in our university or college or colony. Okay? How good, how deep, how long is the experience? So remember, there is a pseudo psychologist, there is an authentic psychologist that we should be able to differentiate, or that are there in the world of practicing psychology. Now, this entire chapter is dedicated to what are important attributes attitudes, skills that are needed for you to be a successful or effective psychologist. Let's dive in and see. And before that, how do you define a skill? हम लोग skill use करते रहते हैं ना, skill, aptitude, attitude. Skill क्या होता है? Skill is possession of qualities to do something or to get something done. Okay? Pay attention to this. Like I mentioned to you, this definition is important. It could come in the MCQ. The other way of looking at it is proficiency, felicity or dexterity acquired through training and experience. For example, if I am trained and certified to be a good swimmer, it is not about knowledge. Along with knowledge of water, this, that, etc., you need to have the skills to swim across the swimming pool, and then you are certified. Similarly, a psychologist is a very skills driven thing, and we will come and talk about what are the skills that are needed. But before that, you need to know that these skills are, one, trainable, and two, you will gather more of it through experience. Okay? And when I come to this part of it, I want you to pay attention to these 5 letters and remember it. Go sick. The summary of this entire chapter I can cover by just talking about these 5 skills called go sick, which is 1, general skills which are needed, necessary. Number 2 is observational skills. A psychologist is a phenomenal observer, not just of people, but their behaviors, their attitudes, the context in which they work or they are being observed, and observing one's own behavior towards that observed. Okay? Number 3, there are some specific skills, we will cover it as we go down the chapter. They are very specific. These 2 are general. This is very specific. The communication, it has 4 subcomponents. We will cover it. Very important. We think communication is speaking. No, we will cover that. Another is testing. Like we mentioned, if there is a loco inventory or multiple intelligence theory, if those tests have to be conducted, I need to know how to conduct those tests. Okay? Interviewing skills. Very important. We'll cover that again. And lastly, the ability to actually counsel. Do I come across as somebody who's counseling and it is being received well or not? So communication becomes important, interviewing becomes important, listening is part of both, and then counseling where you are now communicating what do I do to deal with my crisis or situation of your client or a patient, whichever way you want to address that person. ठीक है? आगे चलते हैं. We will spend a minute on each one of these 5. Very important. This actually forms the summary of your chapter. General skills. What are the general skills? Go and read it up. It's very easy. But the first thing in general skills is about what is called as intellectual and or personal skills, and it starts with the interpersonal skills. My ability to relate with the other person, my ability to build rapport, my ability to get him to trust me. Communication, etc. comes much later, but do I send the right vibes? That's the first part within general skills. Okay? Number 2 is the personality and attitude. देखिए बहुत important है. अगर आप सोचें चाहे डॉक्टर हो या साइकोलॉजिस्ट हो, one of the first things that always is important is, do I come across as a psychologist as a very authentic person? Do I come across as somebody in whom you can confide? Which means in areas of warmth, honesty, authenticity, openness, integrity, I need to be able to communicate these even without speaking or without you knowing me for 5 years or 1 year or 2 years. That's a very important skill, and this comes through amongst the good counselors very well. You may remember the counselor that you have even in your school. Okay? Reflective skills, very interesting. You know, a counselor, actually, as a counselor, if I am practicing psychology and if you are my mentee or a mentor, or I'm the mentor and if you are the mentee, then I need to have the ability to reflect upon my own things before I tell a lot to you. And I should be able to reflect upon my own feelings, negative feelings, positive feelings, my biases. Do I respond differently to a girl vis-a-vis a boy? Do I have some biases against handicapped people? Do I have some biases against this religion or that region or that language? It's very important to know, because a counselor, a good psychological counselor, should be devoid of all these biases, and that you would know if you are able to reflect upon yourself from time to time. Expressive feelings. Needless to say, it will come back again to us in the communication part. We are talking about able to not only feel but express it in verbal as well as in non-verbal terms. Okay, let's move forward. An important part, very simple, necessary for every profession. Okay, very much more here, because this is a very intimate conversation. So your hygiene, the way you dress, do you come across as somebody who's very presentable? That goes a long way. Okay. Affective skills. What is affective skills? You know, when I am in a position of authority, which I am as a counselor or a psychologist, and you are a youngster or my patient or mentee who's coming to me, in some way the power position is like this, which means what I say ends up affecting you, or even the design is to affect. So it should not happen just because of the position, but it also should happen from the way I am built. Okay, emotional balance, maturity, lack of ambiguity, clear communication, all of those without passing judgments, without ever sounding as if I'm assessing you. It's very important. Cognitive skills, very important. Critical thinking, reasoning. So general awareness बहुत ज़रूरी है. For example, if I'm a psychologist and you come from a profession of neurology, or you're a civil engineer, or you're a professor, I must have the cognitive ability. Cognitive ability simply is intellectual power to be able to understand the context from which you are coming, your cultural context, your work context, and then able to synthesize it with my own knowledge, awareness, backstory before I start giving you prescriptions. Very important. Okay? So that's about the part 1 in the general skills. Let's go to the part 2 of the general skills, which is sensitivity to diversity. Extremely important. I did cover this in the previous slide also. Diversity is the only reality in life. No two people are the same. Gender, age, religion, ethnicity, language, they're all different. So being able to manage individual or collective cultural differences, my own knowledge, my own awareness about, do I get affected? Do I have biases? Am I able to appreciate a person coming from deep southern part of America or from the eastern part of Japan? If I am doing a global practice of psychology, that's very important. It's not just logic. There is a saying in the real world of management and psychology that culture eats strategy for breakfast. तो आपका मेंटल स्ट्रैटेजी अच्छा है तो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि आप मैदान में जीत जाएंगे. आपको कल्चर की जानकारी बहुत ज़रूरी है. जो आप उत्तर भारत में कहेंगे उसी बात को लेकर आप कर्नाटका में कहेंगे तो हो सकता है बात न बने, बल्कि शायद बात बिगड़ जाए. This is valid in every profession. In psychologists, it's even more, because the conversation is very, very specific with one person at a time. Okay? Impact of diversity in diverse situations. We've covered this, so I will not harp a lot more on it. It's very important, very, very important. And lastly, appreciate and promote diverse cultures, norms and beliefs. It's not just awareness, it's not just acceptance or reconciliation, it is to promote the diversity. It's very, very important if you are a practitioner of psychology. Okay, let's move forward and then go to the next skill, very important skill called observational skills. Very critical. 90% काम तमाम कर देता है साइकोलॉजिस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ हिज और हर ऑब्जर्वेशनल स्किल्स. और देखिए, मैं बार बार रुक कर ये कहता हूं कि हर प्रोफेशन में इफेक्टिव होने के लिए ये जो प्रैक्टिसिंग साइकोलॉजी है ना, वो बहुत अच्छे होते हैं. अ स्पाई, a captain of a cricket team or a soccer team, an actor, a director, a singer, you take any profession, you will find that there is a 20%, 30%, 10% psychological practice का वो माहिर होता है, क्योंकि वो he is able to put himself or herself in pair of shoes of another person and that makes him or her very effective. So observation skills में क्या है? Ability to pay attention, watch and listen carefully with all senses, not just with your eyes. आवाज सुनता है, the way the person is walking into the room, how does it footsteps, how does it fall, how does it his eyebrow move. If I go into a new place, what is the lighting, what is the psychology of the person who's got this large glass window, makes a big difference. Okay, जैसे मैंने कहा, सराउंडिंग और एनवायरनमेंट को ऑब्जर्व करता है. फ्लोर कैसा है, सीलिंग कैसा है, पेंटिंग क्या है, डोर कैसा है. ऑब्जर्विंग पीपल, हाउ आर दे बिहेविंग, व्हाट, वेयर, हाउ, व्हाई. ओके, देन इसको करने के लिए, एज यू कैन इमेजिन, ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ पेशेंस इज नीडेड. विदाउट द रश टू जज, you are constantly observing with what is called as optimistic curiosity. Psychology में एक बहुत important term है called I am okay, you are okay. Okay? या personality effectiveness में एक बहुत अहम बात कही जाती है, वो ये है कि those people who are very effective, they operate from this location called I am okay, you are okay. मैं अपनी जगह बिल्कुल ठीक हूं, आप भी कहीं से भी आते हो, आपकी राय कोई भी हो, कोई भी नजरिया हो, आप भी सही, मैं भी सही. It creates a win-win situation. And a psychologist needs to have that. Many people observe to condemn, observe to pass a judgment. Good psychologist, good effective professional never does that. He is observing with a curiosity. Curiosity में क्या है word? Positivity है. And he is optimistic about the outcome that will come out of this observation or this person. ठीक है? बड़ा interesting and exciting subject है. Lastly, very important, ethics. Personal ethics. For example, what could be it? You guessed it right. If I am your psychologist, and you've come and shared some deepest problem that you have, you would expect me to keep it just between you and me. It's called professional ethics of a doctor, a lawyer, similarly a psychologist. ठीक है? Observation को आगे लेके चलते हैं और let's look at what are the two types of observations that are possible. You do it all the time. I'm just putting it in the conceptual framework of psychology. Number one is called naturalistic observation, which means अगर कोई इवेंट हो रहा है, आपको वो ऑब्जर्व करने की बात आई है, आप उसको ऑब्जर्व कर रहे हैं, तो आप डिटैच होकर उस प्रोसेस को देख रहे हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, दिस क्लास, इफ इट वर टू बी हैपनिंग, somebody were to come and observe the process of transaction between you and me, the person is right there and then observing us in this classroom. That's a naturalistic observing. That person is detached and this allows our behavior to be seen and studied. But it is possible also that that observational skills can be trained. ठीक? Let's now come to part 2. If you are a participant observer, which means instead of you being a district educational officer and standing there and observing, or if you are a market researcher and you are observing the behavior of people in a mall, where मान लीजिए सेल चल रहा है और आपको ये बताया गया है कि you come and tell me the consumer research, how are the consumers behaving on the last day. You go and stand 20 meters away, take pictures, make your notes and say, acha, this is observation, that is type A, naturalistic observation. But now, instead of being here, you jump in, you go and pick the bag, you join the queue, and then you're talking to the guy in front and the girl at the back, and then you're moving with them, and then making your own notes. You're not detached anymore. You're experiencing the situation, and then you're making the observation. So these are the two types of observations. किसी भी तरह के observation हो, to a small or a large extent, biases आ सकते हैं, which you must be clear about. Biases could be of various types. And also, there is a possibility that I affect the behavior of children in the class if I am an observer who's coming and standing there. Okay? The moment you know that I am observing you, you are likely to be affected than when you know that there is nobody observing you. It happens to all of us. Right? So, that is about observational skills, very important, revise, and then we will keep moving forward. Number 3. Remember we spoke about GOSIC, we have covered O, we have covered G, now we are talking about the specific skill. One of the important specific skills is communication. What is communication? We always think communication is speaking. उसको हम articulation भी नहीं बोलते हैं. It almost is verbal diarrhea. I have to just vomit what I have, and that's communication. No, that's not even speaking. That could just be blabbering. You know, you always speak with a person. Make sense? You speak with a person, which means he is with me when I am speaking with you. That's very important. But that still is only 1/3 of it. Number 2 is active listening. How is listening different from hearing? Hearing is a simple mechanical process. मैं सुन रहा हूं, गाना बज रहा है, मुझे सुनाई दे रहा है. लिसनिंग क्या है? मैं आपको सुन रहा हूं और ध्यान से सुन रहा हूं और एक्टिवली सुन रहा हूं. और एक्टिव सुनने का क्या है? सर हिलाना, नोट्स लेना, हाथ ऊपर करके सवाल पूछना, डाउट्स है तो उसको क्लियर करना, ये सब पार्ट ऑफ एक्टिव लिसनिंग है. एंड इट कम्स फ्रॉम अ लोकेशन ऑफ वांटिंग टू अंडरस्टैंड, not wanting to judge or react. Okay? Number 3, very important, body language. You know, I hold like this and talk. I don't look into the eye, I look down and speak with you. Does it make for effective communication? No, you know that. How do you use your arms? What is the eye contact? How does the whole body resonate or in alignment with what I am saying? Are they aligned or not? Very important. And effective communicators always have this in abundance and in a very appropriate way they deploy it. ठीक? आगे चलते हैं. Some important things about communication. हम, we don't pay much attention to it. But this is a good opportunity to see. See, communication is always dynamic, continuous, irreversible, and interactive. You must remember all these 4. There could be a question that could come here. But more importantly, logically, आप समझिए. Even if you are not responding now, every word that I am speaking is changing the curve. It's continuously changing, going up, coming down, new things coming, etc. Right? It is dynamic. Number 2, it is continuous. As long as you and I are in the same room and we don't walk away, its communication is happening, even without speaking, without exchange of words. Number 3, कहते हैं ना, बचपन से कहते आए हैं कि भाई किसी को तुम अगर चांटा मार दो तो भी वो माफ़ हो जाता है. कई मर्तबा आपने जो ज़ुबान से बोल दिया अगर गलत बात और किसी को चोट लग जाए, उसका अंडू करना बड़ा मुश्किल है। सुना है कभी कहीं पर? That's what he is talking about, saying communication is irreversible. If I hurt you once, I cannot unhurt you. I can say sorry and mitigate the damage, but I cannot unhurt you. And you might remember it, even if you've forgiven me, you might remember it after a long time. You must remember this in mind. And it's interactive. It's not one way. I say something, you respond. Your lack of response also is a response. Okay? Number 2, communications is not always necessarily conscious. It could also be unconscious, unaware. जिसको एक और वर्ड में कहते हैं डार्क स्पॉट या ब्लाइंड स्पॉट कहते हैं. Okay, blind spot can be there of various kinds. Unconscious communication also is that I did not know that I was communicating this to you, but I realized when I heard you say something. Okay. Number 2 is intentional versus unintentional. Okay. I didn't mean to hurt you, but that particular phrase that I used seemed to have hurt you. Okay. Like we've spoken about, verbal and non-verbal. And communication is not just about words, it could be about ideas, it could be about feelings, it could be about a zillion things. Okay, that's what this is talking about. ठीक, आगे चलें, नोट्स बनाते रहिएगा और इस तरह की चीज़ों को ध्यान से नोट करके रिपीट कीजिएगा मेरे जाने के बाद. नाउ गो सीख के एस में पार्ट 2 इज दिस, ओके, विच इज कंपोनेंट्स ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन. Okay, देखिए, one important thing about communication, I'll come to the process in a moment. You know, we do not pay enough attention to this relationship aspect in communication. मैं आपको उदाहरण के तौर पे बताता हूँ. मान लीजिए आपका बहुत अच्छा जिगरी दोस्त आपको आके गुस्से में या ऐसे ही हम लोग गाली देकर बात करते हैं ना, मान लीजिए उसने आपको बहुत छोटा सा कमीना भी कहा. There is an expression of love in that, you know, and that is understandable in northern part of India. Similarly, there are galis in Maharashtra, there are galis in Madhya Pradesh, in Bengal, in southern part of India, but it makes sense in that cultural context where the relationship is understood. If that relationship is not there, and I get onto a metro and one stranger comes and calls me that, will I take it as an expression of love? No, it's quite the opposite. So in communication, remember that relationship is extremely important. Between two colleagues, A says something to B, it gets done. C comes and says the same thing to B, he gets upset because relationship is not in place. Remember this. Number 2, in speaking, there are some very, very important components. ओके, हम लोग कंपोनेंट्स की बात कर रहे हैं. रिलेशनशिप एक बहुत बड़ा कंपोनेंट है. हाउ डू यू मैनेज द सब कंपोनेंट्स विद इन द स्पीकिंग इज एन इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग. पे अटेंशन टू दिस. देखिए, स्पीकिंग इज नॉट वॉमिटिंग लाइक आई सेड अर्लियर. बहुत इफेक्टिव कम्युनिकेटर्स जो होते हैं ना, जैसे फॉर्मर प्राइम मिनिस्टर थे अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी, नोन फॉर वेरी इफेक्टिव कम्युनिकेशन. शशि थरूर की तरह फ्लारी इंग्लिश नहीं था उनका, लेकिन कम्युनिकेटर इफेक्टिव थे, शायद ज्यादा इफेक्टिव थे. शशि थरूर जी also is a great communicator. I'm not saying anything negative, but what I'm saying is clarity and brevity is a very important part of communication. Appropriate vocabulary is not flowery language. बिल्कुल सटीक शब्द का चयन कर कर इस्तेमाल किया, उपयोग किया, उसको वोकैबुलरी कहते हैं. ठीक. कल्चर, अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ कल्चर, व्हाट जोक टू क्रैक वेयर, यू विल नो इफ यू नो द कल्चर. You will not do it in an incorrect place. Okay. Precision, I've already covered in the form of brevity, another word is that, and to be able to manage the non-verbal part very well. ठीक. Having covered this, let's come quickly to the first component, but I'm covering it at the last for a specific reason, because we don't pay enough attention to it, though we do it 24/7 whenever we are awake. देखिए, कम्युनिकेशन में एक प्रोसेस होता है कि ये जो स्पीकर है वो एक आइडिया को लेकर उस आइडिया को अपने जहन में मीनिंग देकर उस मीनिंग को कम्युनिकेट करने के वर्ड्स चुनकर और उसको एक वाक्य में पिरोकर उसको वो भेजता है एक चैनल के जरिए। ये होता है ना कम्युनिकेशन का प्रोसेस। देयर इज अ सेंडर हु टेक्स एन आइडिया, he gives meaning to that idea in his head and he converts that into a sentence, sends it through a channel. Channel could be face to face, it could be a WhatsApp, it could be a mobile phone, doesn't matter. Then that impulse is received by the receiver who listens to it, who decodes it, and he captures the same idea back. If he concludes with a different idea, then the communication has failed, right? So there are two arms of communication. It's very important, and not only we are doing it in the class of psychology, but this is in real life, right? Idea, encode, construct, send. Listen, decode, come back to the idea. Very important part of components in communication in the specific skills of psychologist. ठीक है, आगे चलते हैं। Communication का second part is listening. We've covered this, but take a look at it. You know, when I listen to it, when I listen to what is being sent to me, when I receive it, then I am paying attention to all of these that comes to me as a stimulus. Impulse आता है, उसको मैं receive करके. Number two, second thing that happens is to be able to pay attention to this, right? If the attention is less, maybe there are distortions that will happen. Maybe I will not get it right. Okay? Receive किया, process किया और maximum attention के साथ किया. अगर attention divide हो गया, कम हो गया, I could reach a wrong meaning making, misunderstanding, and so on. Okay? Now, there is a very important technical term that is always used, or a technique that is always used to check whether you have received it right or not. What is it? It's called paraphrasing. सवाल आ सकता है, प्लीज ध्यान रखिएगा। Paraphrasing माने क्या है? To say it in your own words. So you might have heard some good people, effective communicators rather, not good people, saying, I hear you say, did you mean this? What are they saying? ये मैंने सुना, मैं डबल चेक करना चाहता हूं, क्या आपने यही कहना चाहा क्या? इस रिकन्फर्मेशन को पैराफ्रेजिंग के जरिए you summarize it in your own words and then say it. That's what is called paraphrasing. ठीक? So listening के चार parts है: reception, attention, paraphrasing and meaning making. Meaning making मतलब क्या? वही मैं मीनिंग कंस्ट्रक्ट करना चाहता हूं जो आपने भेजने की कोशिश की थी. ठीक? Let's move forward to the third part of specific communication, which is body language. We have covered, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Your gesture, your style, your eyes, your arms, your clothes. Look at this. This communicates something. This communicates something. This communicates something. All of this you must pay attention to. This is a very important part of it. Okay, and you know the important thing is the harmony or the alignment between verbal communication and non-verbal communication that always enhances the effectiveness of the communicator. Okay, and you also will receive it more effortlessly. ठीक है, आगे चलते हैं. Now we are moving into the next part of testing skills, psychological testing skills. These are the now second part of the specific skills. GOS I में communication हमने cover किया है. Now it is the testing part. General skills, observational skills, communication skills are relevant or pertinent for any professional in the world, more or less. but the testing skills is very specific to a psychologist or a professional in psychology. क्या क्या आना चाहिए होता है? साइकोलॉजिकल असेसमेंट, इवैल्यूएशन एंड प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग. और ये जनरल नॉलेज नहीं है, ये वेरी पर्टिकुलर नॉलेज है, पर्टिकुलर स्किल है. व्हेन यू डू अ PhD, व्हेन यू डू अ मास्टर्स इन साइकोलॉजी, व्हेन यू डू द इंटरव्यू असेसमेंट टेक्निक्स एंड सो ऑन, you will learn about these. That's very important. And you end up doing it in individuals, two individuals, or in groups. What are the things that you would normally do in testing? If a psychologist is practicing, she could be testing intelligences of the subject, of the object, of the person, or checking the aptitude. Does he or she have an aptitude for mathematics, or does she have an aptitude for music? She knows which test to take and administer to find that out. Okay? Number 3, for education and vocational fitness. If somebody wants to become a pilot, साइकोलॉजिकल टेस्टिंग करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि पायलट जिनको बनना है उनको क्राइसिस हैंडलिंग में पीछे एरोप्लेन में 240 लोगों की जानें आपके हाथ में हैं. Psychologically, how will you do if there is a turbulence? How do you handle it? स्पेसिफिक टेस्ट आपको देकर आपको टेस्ट किया जाएगा, तभी आप पायलट बन पाएंगे एयरलाइन में, चाहे पैसेंजर एयरलाइन हो या कॉम्बैट एयरक्राफ्ट हो, तो और भी दूसरे लेवल पर चला जाता है. ठीक है. देन पर्सनैलिटी. व्हाट्स योर पर्सनैलिटी टाइप? आर यू गुड इनफ टू बिकम अ मैनेजर, अ लीडर? कंपनीज डू इट ऑल द टाइम. ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, यूनिवर्सिटीज डू इट टू रिक्रूट यू एज अ टीचर. Who does it? A psychological expert does it. Similarly, social attitudes. Okay, so all of these are tested, and when you are looking at the basic competency of a psychologist, you will find these things. Number 1, ability to do a comprehensive and integrated assessment. इसका क्या मतलब है कि अगर आप psychologist हैं and visualize yourself being in, let's say, the army, एंड आर्मी का रिक्रूटमेंट हो रहा है. ठीक है. सो इस रिक्रूटमेंट में आपका जो असेसमेंट है वो शायद इन सारे चीज़ों को या इस तरह के 4-5 चीज़ों को लेकर एक इंटीग्रेटेड कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव असेसमेंट होता है. द एबिलिटी टू डू दैट शुड बी देयर इन यू. दैट्स one of the competencies that is needed in a psychologist. That's an example in the armed forces. It could be any place else also. Number 2, the ability interviewing skills. We'll come to that shortly. Ability to generate data by interviewing is very important. Psychological testing, we have spoken about it. Not only to do assessment, but which test should I take? If you have a battery of 100 tests in your laboratory, you must have the ability to say, this is the test I am choosing, and that's what I'm going to administer to this person who has come for psychological counseling. ठीक है? And of course, evaluation of outcomes and affecting the subject with prescriptions and so on. ठीक? What is the critical thing to keep in mind? And this is something that you should not forget. Again, an important aspect from the examination point of view. What are the critical things to keep in mind in psychological assessment? Objectivity, scientific orientation and standardized interpretation. इसका मतलब क्या है? Objectivity is, it doesn't change by looking at the face. Result ये है तो कोई भी बंदा हो result वही दिखेगा. Number 2, it is scientifically provable. Assessment जो है scientific है, which means उसमें आगे चलकर हम बात करेंगे, उसमें वैलिडिटी, रिलायबिलिटी, बैक टेस्टिंग, ये सारा डेटा बहुत रोबस्ट है, बहुत सॉलिड है, सही जगह किया हुआ है, पहले के रिकॉर्ड्स का वैलिडिटी बहुत अच्छा है, ये सब करना ज़रूरी है. तीसरा है इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑल्सो हैज़ टू बी स्टैंडर्डाइज्ड, which means you are able to kind of at the end of the exercise able to publish and say that if this person is in the top 2 percentile, he or she can be chosen as a pilot for Indian Air Force. उस तरह का standardized outcomes you are able to publish it because the data is so robust and it has been done in such a scientific dependable manner. ठीक? Let's move forward. Okay, I think that's where we are ending the part 1 of this chapter. We will start the part 2 of the chapter shortly, but let me quickly check if you have imbibed, internalized by asking you these 3-4 questions. Answers are also given there. You can do cheating, but let's look at it. For a counselor to understand what the client is saying is which part of communication? Remember we spoke about coding, transmission, decoding. Okay? These are the type of questions that you see. Dash implies all the messages that are exchanged besides words. Besides माने words के अलावा. ठीक? Words is verbal communication. Words के अलावा non-verbal communication. What is it called? Body language. Simple. आगे चलते हैं, एक और दो और. Dash type of observational skills is subject to bias. Okay? The moment somebody knows that you are observing and the person is likely to get affected that oh मेरा observation किया जा रहा है, पता नहीं इसका नतीजा क्या निकलेगा, क्या judgment पास करने वाले मेरे ऊपर, ये मालूम नहीं है. ठीक है? It could affect my behavior and that is subject to bias from me as an observer. In general skills, which skills are about one's own feelings and motives? We started the chapter with this called as the reflective skills. Ability to reflect on myself, my biases, my feelings, my anxieties. Reflective skills. ठीक? I think that brings us to the end of part 1 of this chapter of developing psychology skills. Let's take a breather, go back, read this half chapter, look at the questions, and we'll come back and do the second part of the chapter shortly. Take care. Bye-bye.